I have more books that are really beneficial. This is Directory of Shape and Form by Elizabeth Olver. And this one, The Workbench Guide of Jewelry Techniques by Anastasia Young. And Creative Stone Setting by John Cogswell. These are all three brilliant books. The setting we're doing today is taken from Cogswell's book, and it's a wire basket setting. This is what we're making. A simple little basket setting, in this case for a 5mm stone. G'day. We're going to do a basket setting. I'll just drop the stone in so you can have a quick squiz. Yeah. Now I'm using a 5mm stone for this because this setting is good for bigger stones and it's really fiddly to make for smaller ones. 5 is pretty good, 5 and bigger. Now we're going to make it out of 1mm wire, and your wire needs to be straight because the claws need to be straight. So if your wire is slightly crooked, it's not going to look as good. Now it's been a while since I've done this, and I had a really long day yesterday, so I may be a little bit slow on the uptake today. You're going to need flat round pliers. You're going to need a 1mm joint file, which is just flat, no teeth on the sides, but teeth on the edges. We're going to do the whole thing with hard solder, and you'll need a set of parallel jaw pliers to hold it. So the first thing we're going to do is make our jump rings, and because we're using 1mm wire, the inside will be 2mm smaller than the stone. So what I'm going to do is mark on my flat round pliers 3mm, and then that way when I make my jump ring it should be the right size. So I'm just going to grab the end of the wire, turn it tight against my finger, relax, tight against my finger, and what we want to do is we want it to overlap so that we can cut through where it overlaps, so we'll have a perfect jump ring. Now, we could measure that now and just see whether it's the right size. It's just under 5, so I'll use that for my lower jump ring. Now, what I want is a lower one that's slightly smaller so that our setting will be tapered. You can make it so they're both the same size, but it just, to me, it looks nicer when it's tapered. So I've got my second jump ring now, and I'll cut those. We'll close them and we'll solder them on a charcoal block with hard solder. They're a bit fiddly to hold, so I just hold them with my parallel jaw pliers. So I've got 2 bits of hard solder on my charcoal block, and I'm going to just put a spot of flux on each one. Then I'm going to place the join that I flexed sitting right on top of the solder. That way when we heat it, the solder will flow and it'll move up through the join. Neutral flame. You can use your LPG torch for this if you want to. When we start soldering the little claws on, it's a bit fiddly with propane, but it can be done. Just make sure the solder flows into the join and shift them after they're soldered. If they're stuck to the charcoal, warm them up because the flux gets really hard. Now quench and pickle these. Now we need 2 pieces of the 1mm wire, about 35 mil long. And you're going to use your flat round pliers, grab them in the middle, and you want a fairly tight V on the bottom, because if it's too big of a V, you won't be able to get the wire in tight enough to hold the jump ring. So about like that. And up here it should be the 5mm width, and then down here it'll be the smaller width. So we'll start with the lower one first. So bend both of your bits of wire like this. I always put my jump rings on a little twist of copper wire. It just makes it easier to get them out of the pickle. So now we're going to take our smaller jump ring and we're going to use our pillar file, and we're going to put a small notch, the first one where our solder join is. Now I just hold it in my parallel jaw pliers. It doesn't need to be really deep, but it needs to be deep enough that the wire will sit in it. And on a slight angle, you can't make it so that it's right directly on the side of the jump ring, otherwise you'll have a bit of a gap. Now, what I do is, when I get the first mark, I turn the jump ring right around so that I can do another one opposite, and then I do the other 4 points. So it's north, south, east, west. It's a bit fiddly, but try to get them as accurate as you can. You can pretty much line it up by eye. Oftentimes I'll use the edge of the parallel jaw pliers to file against. And that way it's easier. So now what we're going to do is put that first jump ring in the first V-shaped wire, and I've found that it works a lot easier if you use your tweezers. Because it is fiddly. And the first one I'm doing is the one that has the solder join on it. Now, if you've done your wire right and your grooves are right, when you slip that down in, it will hold itself in position. Now I'm just going to hold this on my third hand and solder these spots one at a time. So just make sure it's level at this point. So just a small amount of flex, and place your solder piece with your flex brush so that it sits right where the two bits of wire touch. Now you don't need a big flame for this one, but you do need to direct it exactly where you want it. So I'm just going to do one side at a time. Push your solder where it needs to go. And when this one flows, then you can shift to the other side. So try not to get it all overheated at the same time. Do each joint individually. So we'll quench this now. Now, I'm going to hold this with my parallel jaw pliers, and I'm holding it right up at the bend because I'm going to cut a 1 millimeter piece out, and that's so that we can slot our other V directly in. Now, by holding this with my parallel jaw pliers, I can cut right against the pliers, and it guides my saw. Yep. So now we're able to just slide our second wire in place. It will still be a bit fiddly because you're dealing with tiny wire, but it will go into place, and then it will snap into where your notches are in the jump ring. Yep. Now at this point, if your notches aren't quite right, what you can do is you can rest your joint file in that little slot, and then you can file at the proper angle. So just touch up those two spots. Mine weren't quite deep enough so that the wire didn't want to stay in. Yeah, that looks better. So now it should stay.